Hello, welcome to the show. Sexual violence against women isn't news to anyone. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry and the Native Women's Association and numerous justice reports have well documented that Indigenous girls and women are far more likely to be victims of sexualized violence than any other ethnicity in Canada. The Metoo Movement refocused scrutiny on an aspect of the problem often just whispered about among women. Women warning other women about problematic men to be wary of. You know, sometimes it's just community weirdos that we know to steer clear of, but too often it's trusted men who hold positions of power and command respect that we know that they don't deserve. This happens in our organizations, it happens in our communities, grassroots protest movements, and even places of healing. Anywhere there are men, there can be violence or harassment of women. While often they fall one by one, they seem to land all too often softly somewhere, and often, as we know from recent headlines, continue to do damage to others. Today, we are putting that in focus. Why is it still going on? Is Indian country lagging behind other movements in identifying and rooting out predators in our midst? What's being done? What's not being done? There's lots to discuss on today's topic. Too much for a one-hour show, so we're actually making sexual violence and misconduct a two-part series starting today with women and then continuing next Wednesday on April 27th, talking to men. So let's refresh our minds about some of what's been grabbing the headlines on this topic. When the Metoo movement exploded in the United States with Harvey Weinstein's litany of sexual assault and misconduct allegations, the ripple effect was felt through Indian country.
An independent investigation in 2018 that found Morley Gugu discriminated against and harassed women. AFN hired law firm Faskin to conduct a separate investigation into the allegations. On October 11, 2019, one day after the AFN received the report, the Mi'kmaq chiefs from Gugu's region ousted him from his role. Now he is fighting to save his name and move on.
2 years later, and involving a different woman, sexual assault charges were laid against that former Assembly of First Nations regional chief. Morley Gugu is set to go to trial on that matter this Friday. For years, women have shared whispers about men to avoid. Even while watching many of those men rise through powerful ranks within our communities, grassroots movements, to the highest offices in Indigenous power. Women came forward with stories of inappropriate contact.
Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. The Facebook messages seemed like it was an old friend attempting to reconnect. But Bethany Mate-Washin did not recognize the name of the person texting her and was weary. It was from an account under the name Charles Forbes, and it had no profile picture.
I was wondering, who is this and why are they calling me by my name?
He asked her to guess who he was and dropped hints like saying she's seen him wear feathers and he's been in the news. She guessed twice and he fed more clues. Then the texter said they had met at the restaurant where she worked and taken a selfie together. That's when she guessed Arlen Dumas. They had taken a selfie together back in February 2018. The texter replied, "Yes, man, you are good." He asked her for her phone number, but she did not reply. However, her phone number was visible on her profile, and the texter began to write her from a phone number, which the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs has since confirmed belongs to Grand Chief Dumas.
Years later, Manitoba Grand Chief Arlen Dumas is now facing an HR and police investigation into other allegations, including sexual assault. Many men escape allegations unscathed, their misdeeds brushed aside in the name of politics. Many more run out of chances and eventually fade into obscurity. And others who are outed choose to address their problematic behavior publicly.
I'm here today to stand my truth and apologize to Laura Lee Hall and her family and her community. I want to firstly acknowledge the pain and hurt that I have caused to her. I sincerely and apologize for what you have went through carrying that trauma.
Even places of supposed healing can be target-rich environments for predators.
She was just crying, but she explained how the elder was saying how he has different desires than his wife, and asked if he can get naked for her, basically, and asked if she wanted it and whatnot. And she got scared. She ran away and told other staff.
Communities and organizations to this day grapple with the age-old problem of men behaving badly and women bearing the scars of that behavior. Hilda Anderson-Pierce is a member of the Nissequoiastic Cree Nation in Manitoba and chair of the National Family and Survivors Circle. She's a fierce advocate and tireless ally for ending violence against Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender-diverse people. I talked with her earlier. Hilda, you've spent more than 2 decades of your life examining and advocating, against sexism, sexual violence, harassment of our women. Just to be really frank, what pisses you off the most about this whole thing?
I think, what I find really upsetting is the inability for systems to react and address, the gender-based violence that has been going on for such a very long time, and develop mechanisms that hold perpetrators accountable. I think that's, one of the most upsetting things to me, because when you look at, especially Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people who've been victimized, they're left with a lifetime of trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and then we have the Metoo movement, which I think you're probably like me, as women, we look and we see this uprising, right? And it's like, this is finally, the change. This is where it's going to happen. It was the kind of feeling that I had in my gut at the time. There's more and more people are coming forward, but has it made a difference? Like, has it made men say, oh, I need to stop my behavior. I have to stop being predatory. I have to stop being toxic.
I think, I don't think it has made a difference, because we're still seeing, an extremely high level of violence, of gender-based violence against, all women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people, so I don't think it has made a difference. What I think it has done is, with individuals who have predatory behaviors, they've gone about it in different ways, because they've gone so long without being held accountable. They feel that they're invincible to any form of justice or accountability, because systems, often favor perpetrators and re-victimize victims. So until systems change, it's going to be very challenging for individuals who have been impacted by gender-based violence to seek any form of justice.
Well, we see these men too, even when they are held accountable, when it's revealed some of the stuff that they get up to, it's like so many times they just land on their feet. Like there's just some sort of protection mechanism built in. And one thing that was a little bit disappointed of in one incident in particular, I won't get into the details of it, was the women coming to make excuses and to protect, from this protective ring around this man. Like, what the hell, I guess.
We often see victims who step forward, especially in smaller communities, even within our First Nation communities, when they come forward and report any type of gender-based violence, they're often ostracized, by the community and by the network of supports, by the, perpetrators' families and friends, and even coworkers, which is really heartbreaking to witness, when you consider, the traumatic experience of someone who's been victimized. And, and there's also a lack of education and training, within our nations to address these type of situations. And I think, governments need to act to ensure that there is, supports and resources to support anyone who comes forward reporting any type of victimization within our nations, and people have to be adequately trained and resourced, to respond and to ensure that there's a safe place to go and that there's supports that are effective.
One thing I wanted to circle back to, and I think this gets lost in the discussion sometimes, but it's an important point. It's something that I'm not overly familiar with. I haven't done, stories on this or research on this, but what is, the sexualized violence, the harassment, the abuse against two-spirit and gender diverse people? If you could just speak to that a little bit, because I think that is something that a lot of us don't really have our heads around.
I don't like to claim spaces for the 2S community, but I like to be, an auntie and advocate for supports and resources for them too, because they experience extreme violence in many levels, when they're struggling, to really claim their spaces of who they are and to be truly who they are. There's a lot of bullying, like victimization, harassment, and many have also experienced sexual violence. So, we need to ensure that spaces are created for the 2S community as well, and that their voices are at all tables, when there's an opportunity to create services or structures, to address gender-based violence.
Yeah.
Or provide healing supports and resources.
Why is it, why is it always the women that are left to deal with this? We're the victims of it, but then we're also the ones who have to try to find ways to fix it. We're the ones that have to heal. We are the ones that have to help people heal. Where's the men at?
I think, when we look at the misogyny and the patriarchy that exists, across this country, I think that's one of the biggest reasons why women, and the 2S community have to often navigate systems and advocate systems and seek justice without the support, of the male community, and I think it's time for many of our Indigenous men and boys, to really reclaim their warrior roles and say enough is enough, because Indigenous women and girls, and the 2S community have been victimized for long enough. Not only are we victimized outside of our communities when we leave, but we're also victimized within our nations and our communities, and it's time to bring this issue to the forefront and to talk about it and to address it and to ensure that there's adequate resources in place to support victims and to educate and for prevention as well. It has to start from a very young age in our schools, to teach about safety, about boundaries, and to teach about behaviors that are unacceptable, because, even when we look at historically, even now, it's like we're, condemned for how we dress, how we act, that it's our fault, that we were victimized, and that narrative has to change. There has to, be a shift on victim blaming and start looking at the perpetrator and their behaviors. Violence is violence, and we need to address it.
Well, next week we're having the men on to talk about this, to see what they're doing to take on this problem themselves and fix it. So it's not always us doing the heavy lifting, like you, Hilda. The heavy lifting that you do is, we are so happy that you could take time out to chat with us. So much admiration for the work that you do.
And I think, it's good that, the men are joining next week, because men and boys are part of the solution in addressing gender-based violence as well. And, there has to be opportunities to heal those perpetrators and hold them accountable for their behaviors. Otherwise, their behaviors continue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hilda.
Okay. Have a great day, and thank you for having me.
Of course. We are joined by APTN's web reporter Kathleen Martens and NWAC President Lorraine Whitman after the break. Kathleen has done years worth of work on the Metoo movement in Indian country. You can read all of it on a dedicated page on our website, aptnnews.ca/metoo. We'll get into more of that when we come back. Stay with us.
I moved the camera to Okay, can you see me?
Welcome back. Let's take a look at some statistics to help put this discussion in context. More than 6 in 10 Indigenous women report having been physically or sexually assaulted at some point during their lifetime. That's compared to 4 in 10 non-Indigenous women. 59% of First Nations women, 64% of Metoo women, and 44% of Inuit women suffered from psychological, physical, or sexual intimate partner violence. Overall, this data represented 61% of Indigenous women. More than a third of the perpetrators of sexual violence against Indigenous women are Indigenous men. Self-reported rate of maltreatment of Indigenous girls before the age of 15 is close to triple that of Indigenous boys. There's a higher proportion of Indigenous people who self-reported being physically or sexually maltreated before the age of 15. That's about 40%, whereas non-Indigenous people, it's about 29%. Joining us now is Kathleen Martens and Lorraine Whitman. Thanks for being with us here, ladies. We just heard some pretty sickening statistics, Lorraine. Indigenous girls being abused at a terrifyingly young age at home, by family members oftentimes. And it just seems like it gets worse as we age, right? It's not safe at home. It's not safe in our communities. It's certainly not safe outside of our communities. Stats show that 2/3 of the violence that's committed against us is by non-Indigenous men, and 1/3 of it is by Indigenous men. How do we live like this, Lorraine?
We keep going forward as best as we can, but NWAC is being a feminist movement in its rightful way, but is what we do. We struggle with the inequality that's there with the women, and the rights of equality that we keep fighting for, that's afforded to the men. And we need to be able to nip that in the bud. We need to work together collaboratively in the movement and making sure that, the gender equality is there in any of the areas, the positions that we may hold in housing, in healthcare. There's so many areas, and we know that racism and discrimination is there. And this all leads back to the whole colonial structure of oppression. And it's unfortunate, but the Indigenous women, we are highly marginalized, and there is a lot of violence that's within that.
Yeah. Kathleen, just a few days ago, we did a story. A traditional healer pleads guilty to 11 counts of sexual assault. Not the first time a healer has been the predator, right? Or at the very least, the pest. Like if they're not the full predator, they're pests oftentimes too. You've been covering these stories for a long time. What keeps standing out for you, if anything?
Well, definitely how much we're not hearing about this. That so many, we're hearing more of it now, but it's coming out now, but we know there's so much of it that hadn't come out in the past.
Yeah.
And that creates, we hear a lot about intergenerational trauma in Indigenous communities from, the effects of colonialism and the systems it put in place with the residential schools and the day schools and 60 Scoop and now the child welfare organizations. This also creates intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
So, and then when that happens, we know already support is lacking in those communities for the existing intergenerational trauma. Then this compounds it. There isn't this is specialized stuff for people to help you with. So again, it's just more trauma layered on top of more trauma without the adequate support and attention that it deserves. Even policing isn't readily available, right?
Yeah.
It's usually an RCMP detachment far away, and then by the time they come, it's over, and there's just so many things stacked against bringing this out in the open and clamping down on it.
Yeah. Lorraine, I want to ask you, if we can go back a little bit to when the Metoo movement happened a couple of years ago, did you think, NWAC's been working on this since you started, did you think that there was going to be some powerful shift, like there'd be this new momentum with the Metoo movement?
Why, most certainly. There have been a lot of initiatives with the Metoo movement. It's been there. It's empowering women to be able to be out there to speak, for our rights and to advocate for women who haven't the voice that would like to be out there. And it's really been a positive movement, in that, and we need more of our women, regardless, to be able to be speaking up and speaking out. Because we are powerful, we're from a matrilineal line where the women have always been there. But as stated before, colonialism, the oppression and the impacts that it has given to our women, our girls, and our, 2S LGBTQIA plus community members, it's caused a negative impact, and we have a lot of healing to do with it. And again, it's from the residential schools, the 60 Scoops, the day schools, and the racism discrimination in the justice system. We see it with the RCMP, we see it in the healthcare, and many institutions. And we need to continue to educate. But, the Metoo movement, has been a positive stepping stone in moving and our voices to be heard.
Do you, we talk a lot about how things used to be. We had matriarchal societies. Do we, we keep saying that, and we keep getting women, like there's a shift in power sometimes about, let's give it back to the women. But we're still seeing the sexualized violence. So what, is it making a difference if we have more women leaders? Like I'm curious for both of your perspectives on that.
If it's okay, I'll go first. I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
There still aren't enough of them to really make a difference, to move.
And they're still operating in a patriarchal structure. You might be a woman, but you're in, right.
100%. Yeah. And I'll hear often that it's women who don't believe the victims.
I know.
And then what? Like first you're victimized usually by a man, then women don't believe you. You're completely isolated. You're sorry you came forward. Things just go sideways from there. And so I think what Lorraine talked about, education, we have to educate the women too. We can't just assume they're gonna think like we want them to think.
That's so true. What are your thoughts, Lorraine?
I concur. I feel that, there's a lot of a lot of education that needs to be going forth. You know, there's the identity crisis of the Indigenous women. It's, you know, intergenerational trauma. But I do believe there should be more women, you know, equality and justice. You know, our women should be there because the men have always taken those positions, whether it's in skilled labor. We see, you know, women in the north, and our women have those skills to be in the employment role. There's many challenges that us as women face as Indigenous women, whether it be First Nation, Métis, or Inuit. You know, and colonialism certainly hasn't helped, but we have to move forward. You know, and if we work as a unified voice, we will get through it. We do get through it. And you know, as far as, you know, the violence, or if women are no better than men in these positions, I really do feel give women the opportunity. Yeah. Because they do come from a different stance as men do. And I think if that opportunity is given there and the women are empowered, I do feel that, you know, the blend of the equality of both are there, a balance of both men and women. And being at the tables makes a big difference. We need to be there and voice the concerns of our women. So yes, there's many challenges that are out there, and we need to, you know, address those, especially in housing. Why is it that women have a more difficult time housing? Single moms have a terrible time. You know, our jobs, you know, the disparity in those jobs need to be rectified. And, you know, we need to be part of that. And we need to be there in the whole healing process.
I want you to tell us, Lorraine, what do you want from the men? What do you expect the men to start doing?
You know, I want the men to be able to work with us, because men are part of the solution. They're also part of the problem.
They're a big part of the problem.
To have a healthy
They're the problem.
Community, yeah, you know, to have a healthy community and what have you, we need to include the men. They need healing. You know, our Indigenous men and boys, they've also go missing or have been murdered. Mm-hmm. And they've been violated due to the, you know, the whole colonialism impact and oppression. Mm-hmm. So, you know, they need to be there as well, and we need to be able to work together.
Yeah. But they still are ultimately responsible for their actions, right? And
exactly. That's why healing and different therapy, you know, different approaches need to be there.
And I'd like to see men call other men out. When a chief is charged, for example, we don't hear anything from other chiefs.
No. Silence.
And there's that silence around it. I don't know what would be so wrong with saying, you know, we're really upset, angry, even dismayed to hear that happened. We hope that the, you know, alleged victim, if you will, is okay, is getting what she or he needs. And, you know, we can't say anything right now because it's before the courts, but we are not happy to hear that happened and there's an investigation. I don't know what's so wrong about saying something like that.
Yeah. I don't think it's too much.
And it's true, they're perpetrators, and there needs to be justice that should be given, and we should know about it, you know, and the names, because there's other innocent victims that are out there, and they need to be protected as well. And yes, we have to call them out on their actions and their behaviors.
You know, we've been talking about, you know, this happens because of settler colonialism, you know, this patriarchal society that we live in now. But even in these like decolonized spaces, as these protest movements oftentimes like to tout themselves as, you know, I've personally been messaged, and I know Kathleen as well, untold number of people who come forward with things that they say have happened at Wet'suwet'en camps, Land Back Lane, Standing Rock, Fairy Creek. You know, there's women and gender diverse people that have said that those are not safe places, not safe spaces. And when they've raised concerns, they say, you know, it falls on deaf ears lots of times, and it's like, don't, because it, you know, if you draw attention to this, it takes away from the cause, right? And so then there's silence in that too. Lorraine, is this something that's come across your table at NWAC?
It most certainly does. You know, we hear about the man camps, we hear about, you know, the victimizing of our women, the violence, the sexual abuse. And, you know, we need to be also able to be able to talk to some of these corporations. They are at fault just as anyone else. Mm-hmm. And our women shouldn't be penalized not being able to go for work in these camps. we're still holding them back, but we all are responsible and we all need to work together, whether it be corporations or what have you. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We're moving forward, but not fast enough. And we've been talking about these issues well over 50 years that I recall. I'm talking about the same issues we talked about 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's going at a slow pace. And, the National Inquiry stated that it's a genocide. And it's existing and it's still continuing today. So we need to step up to the plate and not just use words. We need to use action and to start implementing what needs to be implemented, for the women, our girls, and our gender diverse community.
Yeah. Is it surprising to you, Kathleen, you get those same phone calls and messages that I get too, about this things that people are saying are happening at these protest activist movement camps. Surprising?
No, I think you're going to find bad behavior everywhere.
Anywhere there's men, there you could have this, right?
It's a risk, and you're together in close quarters.
Yeah.
Some people just think, hey, I'm going to take advantage of the situation. There isn't media around, right? There are no cameras. The Mounties are busy with the protesters. Hey.
Well, and if you complain to the Mounties, aren't you, doesn't that, the very thing that took you there was because you're protesting something.
Yep.
If you become somebody who's relying on the police to help you in some way, I can see how you'd be like, I'm not going to report that to anybody.
No.
Like I would just, I guess, quietly leave.
You're at risk even from police.
Right?
Yeah.
So
what I wanted to say though is, for example, we covered a case of a high-profile chief here in Manitoba, and Lorraine was talking about corporations. I mean, we're a news-gathering organization. We were cut off from all communication from that organization because of our reporting on the story.
Yep.
Like that, I see that as toxic, negative behavior, a way to isolate us.
Yep.
Other mainstream media covered the same story we did. They were not cut off.
We were punished.
We were punished.
Yep.
And if that happens to us, to APTN, we can only imagine what is happening to the victims or, girls and women in these isolated communities. We've got all of APTN behind us, and we're being told, don't report that.
Yeah. Well, I know, Lorraine, this is, you'd said you've been working on this for 50 years. Here we are. Nothing has really changed. Progress is slow. What's next on your plate, I guess, to kind of keep it going?
Is to be able to support all of our women the best way that we can. I know there's dollars and funds that the government has set out, for us to, again, just keep applying because we need funds to be able to meet the needs. And it's not a want that our women, our girls, and our gender diverse need. It's a need, it's protection to live in a safe place and to be at the, equivalent to what our men, and the standards that, that they have every day. We don't live in a safe environment. We need to work with our women and our girls and make sure that they are in a safe environment so that they can live a better quality of life that many of our four trailblazer women have forged.
Well, we are out of time. We have to take a break. Lorraine, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and hear your perspective. And thank you, Kathleen, too. Sure. We need to take a break, but here's a couple comments from our social media. Kat wrote, there needs to be more discussion about what happens to the perpetrators. I think Lorraine had mentioned that as well. That's kind of the root of this, and nobody talks about what's being done about it. So shine light on the ones that are doing the violence and change the narrative. I like that point. Will wrote, curious about how other Natives feel about serial sex offenders getting lighter sentences for their repeated crimes because the judge has to take into account his lived experience as a Native. That's a good point as well. The victims don't get the option of a lighter sentence for being victims, but the perpetrators get, and oftentimes repeat offenders, can plead for leniency. Okay, thanks for those comments. We need to take a break, but when we come back to Indigenous journalist Kathleen, who's still here, Wen investigated the Metoo movement in Indian country south of the border. She's going to join us too. And then another Indigenous journalist, the harassment that she got while she was on TV. You can't believe it. Stay with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to meet you.
Where'd those earrings come from?
John Isaiah Peppian. I knew that you would love them.
Oh my God.
He's a Blackfoot artist.
Oh, so
Yeah.
we're down to only.
Oh, matchy.
We are matchy. We're down to only 5 minutes, unfortunately, because we ran over in the last block. You know, the thrill of live TV, you know very well.
Yeah. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited. I haven't seen. I was wondering. I knew you were out west, and I wasn't sure if you were into the States or if you were in southern Alberta.
Yes, southern Alberta. I mean, basically the States, like middle of Blackfoot country.
Yeah.
You know, right in the heart of. So.
Yes. What are you doing in Lethbridge these days?
I actually work for a nonprofit in Toronto. I am the head of content for the ICA. Oh, this side, ICA.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, so it's a whole new job and everything, but I get to do producing and podcasting, and it's a lot of fun. So, and I get to be here.
This is so good.
I can just send in my stuff, right?
Okay.
So
we're going to be coming back from a break. Welcome back. Rachel Crow Spreading Wings is a journalist. She's a former anchor at CTV News in Winnipeg. You know, being an Indigenous woman on TV, there is a whole lot that comes with that. She's also the mom of 2 teen boys and looking to raise better men, which I know well. I'm a mother of a boy myself. Kathleen Martens is a mother of a boy herself, so we know the drill, right? She joins us now from Lethbridge, Alberta. Rachel, I'm happy to see you. I feel like I haven't seen you for a while.
I know, and I just gotta say thank you for inviting me on. This is a dream come true. You know?
Well, you know, I enjoyed your Facebook post the other day about this stranger who slides into your DMs at 3 a.m.
Yes.
And what happened when you call out that behavior. You know, total gaslighter saying, you know, you're the one with the problem for not welcoming his late night advances because time is a colonial construct and you are clearly in the wrong.
Right.
You know, do you get used to this sort of thing after a while? I mean, you know what it's like having a profile and the harassment that can come with it, right? From our men.
I don't know. Right. And I think that's what's surprising is that some of these people that do this are the respected men and the good men and they're not, you know, I mean, or they might be with the community, but in that kind of a situation, relationship to relationship and respecting, it's not there. And I don't understand why. I don't think it's something that you get used to. I think it's something that just stops being surprising. It might be the person that is surprising, but the behavior itself is not surprising. And that's sad.
Yeah.
I think that's sad.
Let's talk about some of the comments that you would hear from viewers, you know, people sitting at home, mainstream media outlet watching an Indigenous woman on their news. What sort of things did you have to endure when that was going on?
I got more negativity than positivity. And I think part of it is because, you know, where I was reporting from, I wasn't necessarily from. So there were times when I would struggle with a word or something, but everybody does that. If you sit and you watch the 24-hour news stations, every anchor does that. Everybody does that. And it's live TV. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't necessarily know what's the anchor is being told, right?
Yeah.
And you're still reading while retaining the information from the control room. But any little mistake, I was a diversity hire. I know they just have to bring you on because you're an Indian. And there was a lot harsher words too that I would not want to share with the viewers, but very racist and very sexist. And calling me down. And a lot of digs at my last name, of course. I've heard a lot of different variations of my name. And, you know, and it's just why? I don't understand why. I mean, people make mistakes, especially live TV.
Yeah.
You know, it happens.
Yeah.
And I don't understand what they they feel the freedom is to do that.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great, Rachel, if, you know, they have a late night show where they have celebrities reading mean tweets, if you could be anchor journalist reading those unwanted DMs, and you know, that might be a thing we could start.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, honestly, like if an anchor has said something wrong, like maybe reach out and tell them the way to say it.
Yeah.
You know, because especially out here, like we might have French words, but they have been anglicized, right?
Yeah.
So I'm saying it the way I'm used to saying it out here in Alberta, or, you know, and then I move that way and it's not the same. And then you get viciously attacked race-wise and because you're a woman. And it doesn't make it for a comfortable thing. And of course, being in the public eye, that is something that you know that is going to come up. But at the same time, that there's a line where it's like, but you're not even being constructive. You're not even trying to help me be better or anybody be better. You're just attacking because it makes you feel powerful. And that's not powerful to me.
We only have about 40 seconds left, but I want to ask you, you know, you're raising 2 Indigenous boys. How are you making sure that they aren't predators or pests, you know, to break that cycle?
I think that I'm very honest with them about what happens to me and how I read it and how I feel. And I think that sometimes a man may not know that he's even coming off that way. I mean, they should know, but they may not know. But how do they know unless you talk about it with them, right? Like with your kids. Yeah. Like you have to be honest. This guy said this to me. You may not have made me want to feel this way, but this is how I'm feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. Kathleen, we've got 30 seconds left here. You've raised a boy. He's in his early 20s. What was your take on not raising a predator?
I have a great story. When he was born, I'm not kidding. I'm holding him and I'm going, when you tell a girl you're going to phone her, you phone her. And I've just tried to keep.
You just hammer that back home.
Well, follow through.
We're out of time and we have to go to a break here. Or not a break here. We've got Mary on the line here. Rachel, thank you. It's always so good to hear from you.
Thank you so much. You take care. See you later.
The Metoo movement blew the lid off of sexual violence that women face, often at the hands of men in positions of power. But despite the broad conversation happening around the world, it continued to happen at a disproportionate rate to Indigenous women. And the headline-grabbing #MeToo didn't seem to really deter Indigenous men from being inappropriate or worse. Marionette Pember of Indian Country Today spent 9 months delving into this whole issue. She wrote a 3-part series, Metoo in Indian Country. We don't talk about this enough. What happens when Native women come forward, and toxic masculinity, addressing a terrible truth. She joins Kathleen, Martens, and I from her home in Cincinnati, Ohio. Mary, thank you for joining us. I loved that series, and it just checked off all of the same boxes south of the border that we see here in Canada too. You know, I have to wonder how in the wake of that, how many more women would be hitting up your inbox with stories?
Yeah, you know, I haven't, as I mentioned, I wrote it a couple of years ago and it ran in 2019. And I was on that beat for a while. I was writing quite a bit about missing and murdered as well. But, you know, not so much. I haven't really gotten that many emails subsequently, but I know it's an ongoing issue. Unfortunately, there are very few tribes that really have any policies and procedures in place for dealing with sexual harassment on the job for their employees.
Yeah. Kathleen Martens here. She's when we were getting ready for this this episode, gathering some of the stories that we've done here at APTN. You could just scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll, and that's just in what we've done in the last couple of years. Kathleen's been kind of front and center for most of these. You know, what continues to strike you, I guess, as you keep covering like the sexual violence or the harassment of Indigenous women by mainly Indigenous men?
Yeah, I will say 2 things, Melissa. One is all of the incidents we don't know about.
Yeah.
I fear that these are the tip of the iceberg, and that iceberg is buried quite deep. And the ones who do come forward would be my second thing. They are very much isolated still, not believed, bullied online. So there is still a lot of work that has to be done around that.
Yeah.
So there are, and the courage it takes to come forward knowing that that online impact is going to hit you and hit you hard.
And they still do it. Well, I'm curious, what stands out for you, Mary, in what you learned in this 9-month investigation that you did?
I think just how really frightened women are to come forward. I mean, and I'm sure it's not just women. There are, folks who are LGBTQ and men as well. But it was mostly women that I spoke to, because there are so few policies and procedures in place. Women are pretty frightened to come forward. I mean, they risk their jobs, and more than that, especially in a tribal environment. They could they could lose their access to housing, other services. And their families could as well. So it's a pretty risky business to come forward about sexual harassment in the workplace.
Well, and then like Kathleen and I were talking just before the show here, you come forward, the odds of somebody making stuff up, that's the exception, not the rule, when people come forward with these sort of allegations. It's more often than not what they're saying is true, and it did happen, right? But there's this reluctance to believe that. It's like almost like the flip side is true, or the opposite is true, where it's like if you come forward, most people are going to think you're lying for some reason, right? And they, that's... We've watched it happen.
We did.
How many times?
And doing that, and the fear that Mary referred to, and you're talking about now, that keeps women victims from coming forward, also helps normalize the behavior.
Right.
So I had a woman call me after my last story when a chief was charged with sexual assault, and she said, I've been reading your stuff, and it's helped me see that this isn't normal, that I shouldn't accept it, and neither should my community, and we need to do more. So I think that's the downside of not coming forward, is you just have to accept it, and thus that leads to it becoming a normal part of your life.
Yeah. Well, and these men too know that it's like, I'm sure they find safety in being predators or pests, which I mean, you're one or the other. Knowing that if somebody did speak up, she's probably going to get taken care of, right? The public will go after her, and there must be a sense of safety that they feel in that. I'm curious, Mary, so in one of the articles you quoted a woman saying the ongoing fallout from settler colonialism and the patriarchal federal relationship with Indian country disrupted those social programs or social systems, that were in place. Our ways have been decimated by poverty and government assimilation tactics, so we have few models of what healthy relationships look like. You quoted a woman saying that. So, I mean, if you could just speak a little bit to that. I mean, is that kind of part of the awareness that people have if we're ever going to kind of move forward and fix the problem? Do you think enough people understand, I guess, what the problem is?
Well, I guess I'm not really sure. Could you maybe form your question?
I'm rambling and thinking at the same time. I guess when that quote that what has caused the problem, right? The settler colonialism, the patriarchal effect of settlers in Indian country. It's changed the dynamics of how we function in our communities, right? And then you add poverty and all the rest of it to that. There's a lot of broken homes. So there isn't those healthy kind of older systems that are in place that we can live from. I guess, do more people need to understand that? And then what would be the next step in tracking it back to get back to those old days? Or can you even get back to what was lost?
That's an interesting question. I think here in the U.S., one of the, elements that forwards this kind of behavior is, these very simple tribal constitutions that were foisted upon tribal nations back in the 30s. It was under what was called the Indian Reorganization Act, and they're just sort of boilerplate constitutions, and they don't typically contain very much of a separation between, like, for instance, the judiciary and leadership, like the tribal council. And many tribes are still operating with these very rudimentary style constitutions, and so there isn't a lot of protection if you come forward. And they don't really integrate these traditional ways that we might have had, to sort of monitor that kind of behavior and penalize that kind of behavior.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to add, Kathleen?
Well, you know, the other thing is that when you do, women used to be in power in a lot of these
it's a matriarchal
communities
society,
before even Canada, the Indian Act came in. And I remember, you know, when the MMIWG inquiry was going on here nationally, thinking like, you don't hear a lot of that. You don't hear a lot of the way women, they were very much on the sidelines in their communities, where they used to have a position of greater influence and power, even of equality, and that's missing. And I think that also contributes to this issue.
Yeah. Well, and then I'll ask you both, you know, is the answer, is part of the solution having more women occupying those spaces of power? I'll let you go first, Mary.
Yeah, probably, and also establishing some sort of policies, you know. The other thing I wanted to mention, I think that's important to note, sexual harassment is different than sexual assault.
For
now,
sure.
Here, in the way that we define it here in the U.S., sexual harassment is considered a civil rights issue and includes like unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or like verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature in the form of quid pro quo, such as, you know, if you do this, if you accept my advance, I'll reward you in some way. And, you know, it could also take the form of a hostile work environment that includes offensive jokes and threats and intimidation, versus sexual assault is a criminal act.
Right.
Usually something physical and involves a type of sexual contact or behavior that, you know, is of an explicit, you know, involving an explicit consent, and this is according to the Department of Justice. Now, I think that sometimes our women may sort of normalize it or dismiss it and say, well, he didn't, you know, assuming it's a man, he didn't assault me physically, he didn't rape me, so, you know, people sometimes will dismiss it and, you know, do I really want to make waves, you know, and I think, and also I heard a lot of women saying, well, you know, we're already viewed so dysfunctionally by the mainstream, you know, we don't want to call attention to something unless it's really egregious. And then also, you know, the notion that, well, this man also does a lot of good things in Indian country, you know, he's lauded for that. Do I really want to, you know, be part of quote unquote bringing him down? So, you know, it's a terrible burden, I think, and women accept some very untenable situations in their workplace because of that.
It's so gross. And I can say it's true. I mean, I was in a position I had a boss, and it was the exact way that it was years after that I realized, you know, when it sunk in, what happened. I was just being harassed. So I thought that's fine. Like he's not crossed a line and groped me. If he did, I would hit him. You know, I would deal with that. You know, you never realize the toll that it takes emotionally on just consistently being harassed relentlessly by somebody who has a position of power over you. You talk to a lot of interesting people, Kathleen. What are they saying? Where do we kind of go from here? We know that the problems are there. Is there a fix, or what's kind of the next step towards a fix?
Yeah, I know you're going to touch on this with other guests as part of this deep dive you're doing on the subject, which I think is very valuable. The more we get out there and talk about it and people understand, like Mary listed the difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault, the more people get educated about that, the better it's going to be. Remember, good touch, bad touch. Yeah. Remember when we were kids, we were taught about that. So I think education is a key thing. Also, you know, men, there are a number of groups just in Winnipeg where we live that have healing for men, right?
We're having a bunch of them on next week too, because this is a 2-part series, right? And next week we're going to the men, and it's like, what are you doing to sort yourselves out? Like, you need to fix, this is your we're doing all the heavy lifting. What are you guys doing? And there's some incredible men doing incredible work. So that's next week though. You have to come back for that.
Yeah, so I think that is part of it too. You can't just have women fix this problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That men have to be involved. And I know when I did a Metoo story in Indian country, that is what the women said to me. Our men need healing.
Yeah.
Just like we do.
Yeah.
And we need to be in this together, and we need to talk together about it. Can't just be, you know, oh, we're the victims, you're bad, fix it. You know, it's a very complicated thing.
Yeah. Mary, I'll give the last word to you. We are huge fans here at APTN of Indian Country today. What's keeping you busy nowadays?
Well, I'm doing a deep dive into Indian boarding schools. My mother and my grandmother and most of my family are all survivors. So I've actually been writing about it for over 20 years. And suddenly, because of what's occurred north of the border, you know, the world is finally realized that this is an issue and this happened. So I'm really busy with that right now.
I'm happy to hear that, because it is an issue that we don't hear enough about south of the border. Mary, thank you for joining us so much, and we'll look for that article that you'll be doing on the boarding schools down in the United States.
Well, thank you for having me.
We are all out of time for our part one of our two-part look at sexualized violence and harassment. Be sure to join us next week. We are getting answers from the men. Why do they do this? When are they going to warrior up, to quote Hilda from earlier, and sort of break themselves out of this cycle? The women have been doing all the heavy lifting on this for too long while being the victims of the abuse. It's got to stop. We're going to talk to some amazing men for that. I'm Melissa Ridgen. We'll see you next week. You can check out the Metoo stuff that Kathleen Martens has done, aptnnews.ca/metoo. Have a great afternoon.